Gene Lipkin leaves Atari. Electronic toys are heading for a cliff. And digital information services go corporate. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I'm your host, Carl, and this is my co-host, Peter. Say hi, Peter.
Hi.
Excellent. So, we've got the formalities out of the way. For those of you joining us for the first time, or for those who need a refresher, remember, the whole point of this podcast is that we go back in time to see what was making headlines either 40, 30, or 20 years ago. And on today's episode, we're going to be going back 40 years to December of 1980. But before we do that, obligatory podcast small talk. Peter, talk to me in a small fashion or something.
Small fashion. How was your Christmas, dude? I think it was the first Christmas with your child, wasn't it?
Not the first one, because she was born on the 12th of December. So we did a Christmas last year, but she was more or less basically just just there. But this time she discovered the absolute wonderful and apparently unsurpassable joy of ripping paper off of packages.
Wonderful. And in her age, even next year, you can just wrap up the stuff you gave her this year and she'll...
Really figuring out what was in the box was nowhere near as interesting as tearing the paper off of it. I have to give props to my mom. She actually took it to the next level where she put the gift inside of a box, then wrapped that box, then put that box in a bigger box, filled that box with paper, and then wrapped the bigger box. So it literally just kept going and going. It was kind of entertaining to watch. Granted, it didn't take my daughter too long to get through it, but still, it was fun.
Did your mother do this for you when you were a child?
I have no idea. I did not ask, and I'm guessing no. But then again,
okay.
Yeah, it's one of those things that is probably lost to time. Unlike the great stories we're going to be talking about today. No, just kidding. If people are already listening to this, I don't have to plug it. Okay. And how about your Christmas?
Oh, it wasn't bad. I mean, obviously, it didn't turn out as expected due to all those restrictions, you know. We wanted to have the entire family, and this year, for the first time, also my girlfriend's family over at our place and have a big family Christmas. And due to the restrictions, now we had some smaller Christmases spread over the last 3 days.
Oh, that's good.
But it was good. Yeah, it was really good. And I think this way it was a little bit more relaxed, you know, because people, I mean, my parents were at their place, my grandparents were at their home, and my girlfriend's parents were at their respective home. And we basically just drove to each of those families and places and enjoyed some nice coffees and dinners. Nice time. A whole lot of driving, but it was nice. I really enjoyed it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
No, we did the same thing. I did bounce around to my wife's parents, and then my parents came to our place a few days later, and blah, 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 blah. So we spread the holiday out a little bit. But that just made it nice.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, okay, there were those restrictions, but even without them, I felt better that way, because even in our family circle, we kept some distance. You know, I mean, me working in a hospital, I actually got tested on Monday before Christmas. I was on vacation, but nevertheless, I drove to the hospital just to get this weekly test, you know, just to be safe. And of course, it was negative, else I wouldn't have met with my family. But even though, I mean, being able to keep some distance, at least to my grandparents, it actually felt better.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, and you have to. I mean, you have to make the adjustments necessary that the situation requires.
Exactly. And it was a nice Christmas nevertheless. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now, we should get started on this since we still have to do 3 episodes altogether for December. So for those who may have missed the November news, we've now changed the format and we're dividing up the episodes. So each episode is a separate jump instead of one massive episode with all the jumps in it. So just remember, if you do want to contribute to the show, we have a Patreon. We have a bunch of interviews up there. By the time this goes out, there's going to be an early access interview that I did with American McGee of American McGee's Alice, American McGee's Bad Day LA, American McGee's Grimm, and of course, little game called Quake. Fame. So awesome interview. If you want to find out what the game development business looks like in China, where he's been located for almost 20 years now and been working out of, definitely check it out. It's a fascinating insight into a part of the game industry that I honestly didn't know a lot about going into it. And so I think everybody's going to get a lot out of that interview. And of course, we talk a little bit about, partying with Nine Inch Nails during the Doom and Quake days. But the far more interesting part, I believe, is the later part of his story. So that's fun. And yeah, that's all I got on that. But before we turn on the time machine, we do have to check in with our good friend Ethan of the blog The History of How We Play, because he does our monthly corrections. And in a little segment we call the Department of Corrections. So, Ethan, welcome back.
Thank you for having me back, even though I embarrass you all the time in front of your friends.
Yeah. If I had any friends, that would mean something, but I don't. I just have enemies to conquer or something. So, hit me. What did I get wrong this time?
The trash pile of corrections. All right. Well, we got 3 going on here. The first part is that you were talking about enhancement boards, and you talked about the GCC, who later go on to do Miss Pac-Man, but you were recounting it and talking about it as if Bally was the one suing GCC, but it's Atari that sues GCC and then later settles, and that has nothing to do with Miss Pac-Man at all. That has to do with their Super Missile Command enhancement board.
Okay, so just to get it straight, and yes, I definitely should have gotten the companies right. So, GCC was making add-on boards for different arcade cabinets.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they get sued by Atari for their Missile Command add-on.
Yeah.
And it's later on their modification board for Pac-Man gets picked up and turned into Miss Pac-Man.
Yeah, it's kind of simultaneous just in terms of the timeline, because they get sued in 81 and they're working on this crazy auto board in about 1981, which becomes Miss Pac-Man in 1982. So it's tempting to conflate them, but they are not actually related.
Gotcha. And sorry, when you said Crazy Auto, I was just thinking, I wonder if there was any Evil Auto Berserk influence going on there.
Yeah, that's something you'd have to ask them. That did cross my mind, but...
Okay, cool. So, well, then I can't believe I should know that story, and I'll put some links in the show notes to sources on that. So, what else did I get wrong?
this one's not technically wrong, but you were recounting Becky Heinemann's credits, and you skipped straight to Bard's Tale 3. She was actually working on the first Bard's Tale as well. I just thought that was important.
What was her capacity on the first one?
I think a producer? Hold on, I gotta Moby Games this now. She was a programmer on the original Bard's Tale, at least one of the versions. Not a game designer, which I think some people report, because that was a Michael Cranford design, but she did program on the original Bard's Tale, at least one version of it.
Where are you seeing that in the Moby Game entry? Because I'm looking at her credits right now.
It should be at the bottom of her programming credits.
There I have Taz Times and Tone Town.
And then 86. Tales of the Unknown, Volume 1.
You're right. I overlooked it. I keep forgetting that Bard's Tale wasn't actually Bard's Tale. That was
Tales
just
of the Unknown, Volume 1. Because they were trying to create a brand around their RPGs, but they realized that was stupid, so they didn't do it.
That is very, very true. Okay, so yeah, she's got the credit on the Commodore 64 version.
Okay, Commodore 64.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, then in that case, I did not know that she was programming any of the versions before 3, so that's good. But in 3, I think she has more of a design credit, doesn't she?
Yes, she was the game designer for Bard's Tale 3.
Gotcha. Oh yeah, that's also the first design credit that she has on Moby Games.
Yeah, which may or may not be true, but...
Well, yeah, that's... You always got to take those things with a little bit of grain of salt. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So, 2 down. What else we got?
Last one here. Well, actually, before we do this one, we should do one we forgot from last month, which came from Stefan, if you recall.
Yes. Oh, you're right. We did miss one. And this concerns his favorite company, Sunsoft. Was it the Stratobox? No.
No, it was that Sunsoft still exists.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. He wanted to make very, very clear that Sunsoft is still an ongoing concern. And that my mentioning that they don't exist was
that was
very
mine.
much
It was mine, actually.
Oh, yours,
yes,
correct.
I said it.
Yes, you said it, and you were wrong. So our corrector was wrong.
Head in shame. I must do the 3 bows. Okay. I think I've atoned for my sins.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right.
Yes, you
one
have.
Last.
Yes, sir.
So the last one, just because my correction should go last because that's how things work. And the numbers that in the middle of the podcast you were looking up the numbers for the Space Invaders home port on the VCS. They are fake. They are
really?
not right. Yes. We have a document which tells us at least some of the numbers for the best-selling games on the Atari VCS, probably to about 1984. It's kind of complicated. We won't get into that right now. But Space Invaders is actually not even in the top 20. And this is a total accumulative list over the years. It actually says how much in each year. And it's a very, very good document. But there's never been any confirmation on how much Space Invaders sold. Not even estimates like at the time or anything like that. It probably sold over 1 million, but whatever number you said, which I don't even remember, I don't think had anything to do with reality.
Gotcha. And I think at the time we also mentioned it that the number
could have also included the arcade cabinets sold. It could have included some other
that would make
variation,
no sense at all because when you're talking about arcade cabinets, you're not talking about millions, you're talking about tens of thousands in the best case scenario. And, even if you're talking about in Japan, every Space Invaders variant, all combined, which was counted at the time, it was 300,000. So that's not even 500,000. So that wouldn't even affect whatever was on Wikipedia.
Gotcha. Okay, so now we know that we don't know how many Space Invader cards were sold for the 2600.
I thought you were just going to say anything.
No. We know a few things. I mean, we could go very Descartesian here and say that we know that we ourselves exist, but everything else could be a figment of our imaginations. So, Ethan, I'm sorry to break it to you. You're a figment of my imagination.
Did he just correct himself?
Yes, he did.
Wow.
I know.
Corrected.
That just shows the dedication we have to getting the history right here on this show. Now, if he'll ever acknowledge how wrong he is about the GameCube controller, then, maybe. But
dude, I think this will never happen. Him saying, no, it's just not gonna happen.
Probably not.
Anyway, all right, man. Want to jump right into 1980?
Yes, let's do our final jump to the year 1980 right now.
The interest in electronic games apparently
personal computers that can swallow a book. 1980.
Games people play.
Welcome to December of 1980. Peter, what's our first story?
Yes, our first story. Gene Lipkin leaves Atari.
One of the original 4 shareholders of Nolan Bushnell's arcade game maker and the co-president of the Atari Coin Games division, Lipkin has resigned his position. While he will stay on as an advisor, aka paid to stay at home, he would later remark that he was unwilling to become one of the many, quote, pinstriped Atari men, unquote. Ray Kassar, president of Atari at the time, tries to put a positive spin on it, but it's obvious that this, after the loss of the Activision programmers, is a sign that talent is draining from the company.
So, I mean, okay, Gene Lipkin, and you already said it, he was co-president of the Atari Coin Games division. However, what did he do? I mean, wasn't he pinstriped already?
No, after the acquisition by Warner Brothers. Now remember, Warner Communications purchased Atari back, and I'm probably going to get crucified if I get this wrong, but I believe it's 77 is when Warner buys them, or maybe 78. And the reason Nolan Bushnell sells to Warner is because he needs money to get the Atari VCS, the 2600, on the market. And, there's other reasons too, but that's the primary one. And so Warner Brothers is coming in as this giant conglomerate. And remember, we've talked about this several times. This is the age of the conglomerate still. This is when companies were not just focused on their one core business and maybe ancillary businesses related to the core business. They would just buy stuff in completely different areas. Exactly. And the idea was, well, if one area goes south, you're covered because you have leverage in other areas. And what this does is it means that the people at the top management they can come from any corner of the company. And at the same time, having them specialized in one industry just means that they're not really useful in the conglomerate sense of, in the conglomerate idea. And the conglomerate wants these gray-suited, only business-focused people because they're supposed to be movable between the different areas. And That's what's running Warner Brothers, and that is what is seeping into Atari. I mean, Ray Kassar comes from the manufacturing of towels. Okay, he was a textiles guy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but see, this is there's the famous quote that probably was never said, but a famous quote that the Activision guys like to bandy around, which was that Ray Kassar supposedly said, game developers are just like the people who designed the patterns for towels. I mean, they're infinitely replaceable.
Okay.
And yeah, and if you could program the VCS, I'm sorry, but you were already on almost a genius level if you got that machine to do anything. And let alone make it do something and design a game that was fun to play. And so this is why the loss of these technical people is a sign that even though Atari is heading, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, is heading towards its best times, it's going to become the thing that controls the earnings of the entire Warner Communications conglomerate. It is at the same time a company that is losing all the people that make that success possible.
Yeah.
And Lipkin is just the latest and one of the biggest names to be lost. And he's going to go on and do a bunch of other stuff later on. He's going to be at Sega for a while and stuff. But the idea that they're losing these people right at this time as they're going into the Christmas season, as the VCS is finally finding, acceptance in the market, they're going into it with all the wrong setups. And if you remember back, the very first episode of this show, the November 1989 jumper, November 2018 show, the first story was how Nolan Bushnell is forced to resign because he's screaming at the executives at Warner saying, the VCS is great, but we already have to prepare the next console. We need to kill this thing because it's not going to be powerful enough to carry the company forward. Well, these guys aren't technical enough to understand that. They're going to, and this is what's going to cause part of the crash, is that they're not thinking of the technology. They're not thinking of the market. They're not thinking, how do games work? Why are games fun? What are the innovations in games that are going to be necessary to keep the market interesting? And they're also not thinking of the technical aspects of games and game marketing that might have prevented a crash to begin with. And so, yeah, basically it's one small drop in the bucket, but it is it's sort of a symbol of what is going on at Atari at this point.
Mm-hmm. Well, from a management perspective, this is really interesting because those decisions actually, even during the time, you can recognize that this company is going to go down the hatch.
But they're going to actually have their biggest years. This is going to become the fastest growing company in American history.
Sure. Yeah, of course. I mean, maybe not short term, of course, but at least midterm or long term.
Oh yeah, I mean, and the problem is that they've created the juggernaut. It's going to run away from them.
Yeah.
And the problem is that anybody who would have been in a position of knowledge, not a position of power, but in a position of knowledge to understand what was going on and maybe redirect the ship, is not going to be there anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Talking about business, Gottlieb signs a deal with Sigma.
Gottlieb, the embattled pinball maker whose financial woes we talked about last month, is trying to claw back some ground by licensing a game from Japanese game maker Sigma Enterprises. The game, New York, New York, is a derivative space shooter with a single gimmick, a monochrome picture of the Statue of Liberty in the background. This announcement comes as they are launching their first video game, No Man's Land, which they licensed from Universal. Now, this game, I'd never even heard of it before.
No.
I'd never heard of New York. No
mean,
Man's Land I also hadn't heard of before. It's also a forgettable nothing title. But the deal with both of these games is just that they are licensing them from other parties. As we've talked about before, Universal already has a seat in North America at this time. That's where Joe Morici, who we've interviewed, is working at this point. The fact that they're essentially buying other companies' leftovers to just have something to sell through their distributorships is a sign of just how fast video has basically pushed pinball aside. I mean, last year we were talking about how Atari still had a pinball division, how they thought, you needed to have pinball in the mix. Well, this is now a complete reversal within 18 months, where pinball is yesterday's game and the pinball makers are having to scramble to get something on the market to not be completely irrelevant.
Well, and I think a monochrome picture of the Statue of Liberty isn't surely doing it.
No, definitely not. Curiously enough, this weird New York game got a re-release a year or two later in Japan, where it's the same exact game, only they changed the background picture from the Statue of Liberty to some character from a science fiction anime series. And they got the license for that anime series and stuck it on there. And I'm looking at this going, wow. I mean, I guess it's a way of reusing the hardware, probably just pop out a ROM. But it really does show just, everybody is trying to do some gimmick, but the space shooter thing is still in the vein of Space Invaders. And we're about to see that the space shooter is going to be pushed aside by things like Pac-Man, which we talked about from the AMOA 1980 show. There's a lot of new games coming. The hardware's getting better, and you're going to have to find something to push to jump out of the crowd.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it wasn't only the radio star who was killed by video. Interesting. Sorry, I wanted to say this for like the last 2 or 3 minutes.
The radio store?
Star.
Oh, radio star. Yeah, this is true. Yes. Not just the radio star was killed by video. That's very true.
Exactly.
But moving out of the arcade
and into the toy business, being in chaos.
The predicted flood of electronic toys and sluggish economy are leading to some very sharp discounts leading up to Christmas. The New York Times reports that last year's big sellers are being deep discounted through pressure by knockoffs and updated units. Milton, a new game by Milton Bradley which talks, isn't moving, with one retailer claiming consumers may not be ready for talking devices just yet. Coleco is expecting big sales, but the true winner of the season seems to be Atari's VCS, aided by Space Invaders. This is funny because we've been talking about it for a few months already, and I've been seeing it. I hadn't reported on it as much as I could have, but all the toy trade press keeps repeating this line about how there's too many electronic toys on the market, too many SKUs, and they just don't know how to position it all because there's so many knockoffs. And the fact that the New York Times is bringing this article on the 23rd of December, so 2 days before Christmas, their reporting is based off of the Christmas sales that have already finished. I mean, people have already bought their toys by the 23rd. Hopefully. Maybe.
Most of them.
Most of them, yes. Yeah, and Milton is one of these pretty much forgotten games, and it's really going to become the year where the VCS finally takes over, and it's going to be harder and harder to sell electronic games. These, small circuit or very, very primitive games the same way because, well, now you've got the video games on the TV.
Yeah, exactly. But we are not talking about those Game & Watch alikes here, aren't we? We're more like games like Simon Says and so on and so on.
We're talking about both categories. So at this point, you could. I mean, I'm not a super expert in this area, and I'm sure that there's somebody out there, and if somebody wants to come on and do a special episode just on these electronic toys market, I'd love to do it. Now, my understanding is you could break them down into three major categories. You could say the games without a screen. This would be your things like Simon, or what's the other big one? It's that weird red-looking thing with a bunch of buttons on the front, and it looks like like a phone. I'll think of the name when I don't need it anymore. But you have these non-screen games. Sometimes they have flashing lights. Usually they got flashing lights. Then you have the LED games. These are the ones with the little red LEDs mostly. This is where Mattel's early games like Mattel Football comes in, or even Coleco's Football, and all of these. So Michael Katz, one of our interviews, he was involved with the first development of those. Very interesting interview. Go and check it out. And so that's another category. And then there's the last category, which is the one that's just now popping up, especially or most well known through the Game & Watch, which are the LCD screen games. Those are just beginning to hit the market at this point. We've talked about Game & Watch premiering in 1980 with Mego Toys getting the license for North America and renaming them. So the Game & Watch games, that LED strand of gaming, that's the one that's going to survive out of these three groups. And they're going to do fairly well because they can mimic graphics. And they can do a little bit more than just flashing lights. They're still going to be extremely limited, and we're going to see a massive resurgence of those in the late 80s, early 90s in the NES era with Tiger and Acclaim getting into this business. But for the most part, what we're seeing here is the death of those first two categories, or at least a massive, massive decline of those first two categories.
Hey, have you heard that there is a re-release of the Game & Watch?
Yes, of course I have. In the year 2020, we had a new Game & Watch, which is basically just a little handheld console in the vein of a Game Boy Advance or a DS. Mm-hmm. It looks like the old one from the outside, but it basically plays a variation of Super Mario Brothers on the NES with some extra added bonus features.
Yeah, it's a game and basically in the watch because there's a clock inside the thing.
Yeah. Although the original intent of the Game & Watch, Gunpei Yokoi's original one, was so that salarymen could display it on their tables as if they had a digital watch and at the same time play games when their boss wasn't looking. So, I mean, in many ways, the new one doesn't really fulfill the purpose of the original, but, it's all good.
I think it's just a collector's kind of thing.
Oh, definitely, especially at the price they're charging. I mean, it's a very expensive unit, so. But hey, yeah, $65 to play Mario? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. But anyhow, we are not in 2020. We are in 1980. And this is actually a year where the D&D co-developer gets into computer game design.
That's right. David L. Arneson, the co-developer of D&D with Gary Gygax, is credited with the design of a new tactical computer game based around World War II called RAF, The Battle of Britain. The game is a purely stat-based air combat game and, according to Moby Games, would be the only game Arneson would be credited with creating. 4D Interactive Systems, the developer, is still in the business today, having worked on everything from games to medical devices. So I did talk to Ethan about this story briefly when we were doing the corrections. And yes, apparently Arneson was a co-founder of 4D Interactive, but we didn't really have any additional information on any game development. So as far as I can tell, and please, if somebody knows better, correct me, this is the only computer game David Arneson actually designs. But it's interesting to see that we have the D&D craze is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, as we've mentioned several times on the show in this period. And Arneson is already out of TSR. He already has nothing to do with the game at this point. And to see, where is he going next? And the fact that he's doing what would be a traditional stat-based strategy game, the type of strategy game that you would see on a table or something, is very similar to what companies like SSI are doing at this point, is trying to take these stat-heavy war games and transferring them over to a computer where a lot of the legwork, the math and so forth, can be taken over.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's a good place to have those games being played at,
Yeah, I mean it's a natural fit.
You're into the math. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a natural fit, and unlike a role-playing game where the computer does very poorly with things like, dialogue or adjusting on the fly to unpredictable choices by the players, in a straight-up war game, it's all by the numbers.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot more sense that that would adapt well to a computer.
Yeah, of course.
And if you want to know more about that, there's also a great interview with the founder of SSI in our archive, link in the description below. Yeah, I know. I'm just plugging all these other episodes. Guys, just go through our entire archive. It's easier that way. Also, remember, all of our references for what we're talking about here are linked in the show notes. So I'm really not doing this in the right order today. I don't know what's up.
Doesn't matter. We get through it. Reader's Digest buys The Source.
Reader's Digest, not Reader's Digest. That would be turning it into a verb.
All right.
Yeah.
Reader's
So,
Digest.
pioneering online service, The Source, founded in 1978, is being purchased by publishing empire Reader's Digest Association. The merger is the result of The Source's financial problems, which have been mounting for months. Jack Taup, the financial backer of the company, cut the deal with Reader's Digest. This caused the company founder, Bill von Meister, great name by the way, to sue, and he ended up getting $1 million as a settlement. Von Meister would later go on to found a company called Control Video Corporation, which would eventually fold into or evolve into what we know then in the 90s as AOL. Big companies coming in and buying stuff up in new areas. Now, for the younger listeners, I'm going to use Peter here as a surrogate. Do you know what Reader's Digest is?
Well, considering I'm not able to pronounce it properly, obviously not.
Okay. Now, for those who are not familiar with Reader's Digest, in the U.S., for example, it's still one of those small journal-sized magazines that you can sometimes still find at the checkout counter at your local supermarket, or at least you could a few years back. And what it is I believe it's a monthly or quarterly publication with excerpts from books that have come out in recently. So you would buy this and you might get 20 or 30 chapters from different books, sort of excerpts to whet your appetite, to give you something to read that might be something you'd want to pick up someplace else. That was the gist of Reader's Digest as a publication. And it was a great deal because it got free publicity for the actual books, and at the same time then they got their content and could sell this thing. And so they also had a bunch of other businesses at this point. They were publishing a bunch of other magazines. And the idea of these online services that would deliver information directly to the home via computer, this was already on a lot of people's horizons. They were seeing this coming. And the Reader's Digest is jumping the gun and saying, hey, we want in on this. We want to be in this business.
So what did they do with the technology of the source?
The source ends up surviving for quite a while. I don't know off the top of my head if Reader's Digest is the company that continues to own them. For that lengthier period, it's very possible that they actually sold them off. And to answer your question, Peter, because of course I know these things, I did just look this up again. Reader's Digest is the primary owner until 1989 when the service is sold to CompuServe.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. But it's never as big as those other companies, as AOL or CompuServe. I mean, they max out at about 80,000 subscribers. CompuServe has 500,000 at the time they purchased them in 89.
Okay, that's really not that much.
No. I mean, the source is the first one out of the gate in 79, but it's 78, sorry. But it's just a little too early. And what it can offer and how it can do it is just, it's just too early.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it shows that Von Meister really is a visionary guy.
Yeah. Also, may or may not be a bit of a douchebag, but I'd love to talk to the guy just to understand what's going on. But he unfortunately passed away in 1995, so there's no way for me to talk to him anymore other than going through a séance. And but his son passed away in 2004, so doesn't help us much there.
This family really is avoiding you, man.
Yeah. I'm sure that I was very important in that situation.
This is how it is. People pass away, others are born, just such as Nexus being born.
Oh, nice transition. Yeah, did you practice that?
Dude, I have to contribute somehow.
Excellent. So, Mead Corporation, famous for its paper notebooks, has launched the Nexus database service through its Mead Data Central subsidiary. The new service will allow users to search and access full texts of a wide variety of news publications, including The Washington Post, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, and newswire services like UPI, AP, and Reuters. The database would become the go-to standard to this day, ultimately being merged with Mead's existing legal database Lexis to form LexisNexis. And do you know what LexisNexis is?
I've really heard of that, man. Let me not at all Google it so I can.
Well, I can save you a lot of time and trouble there. LexisNexis is the premier database for full text media services. They operate worldwide nowadays, and I normally in non-pandemic times have access through the university, so I do a lot of research on it for the podcast. And my first encounters with it at university basically changed my whole approach to understanding history and stuff, because I could just look up articles about things, keyword searches. It was essentially Google before Google and without all the weird garbage that you get on Google. And phenomenal system. When I saw this article in Kilobaud magazine, I was really taken aback because, number one, I never understood the connection between Lexis and Nexus, between those two services, the legal database and Nexus. And there's a fascinating history here. I mean, I just looked it up a little bit online. There's a link to the Wikipedia entry in the show notes. But the way that this evolved, originally out of a military project, to create a full text database, and the technology was then applied to a state legal resource. So they just took all the legal decisions of one state and applied it, and then did all 50 states. And this replaced the old shepherdized book system. We're talking here late 60s, early 70s. So very early on, and it makes sense that it would be in the legal field because, number one, there's the money involved. I mean, the amount of time lawyers save by being able to research old cases through a computer database as opposed to through the shepherdized book system that existed was so massive, and at the cost of lawyers' time, made sense to build this system as early as they were building it. And once you have the database infrastructure and you've figured out all the kinks of full text word search, well, taking it to the next step and just adding newspapers and magazines and newswire services, it's a natural evolution of just enough storage space and you can pull it off.
I think it's really fascinating that this thing actually worked in 1980.
Well, I think it's even more fascinating that it worked a decade before that already.
Even that, of course.
Yeah. And this is one of the cool things. I honestly would have, if you had asked me when this was created, I would have said no earlier than 88 or 89. The fact that this is up and running in 1980 just kind of, together with the story about the source, and we've talked about a few other services that are popping up around this time, that nascent idea of the interconnected computer systems, the idea that the home computer only truly becomes useful when you have access to these massive databases, something that we wouldn't actually realize in the home until the mid-90s at the earliest. that's already present in everybody's mind in 79, 80 is something that, as somebody who wasn't there or wasn't active in this at the time, you don't realize that was what was going on. And I think that to really appreciate the visionary ideas behind this is something that really puts everything else in perspective.
Yeah, I'm still fascinated that this thing was up and running in the 1980s.
Yeah. Now, granted, it was expensive as hell, and doing it at home was prohibitive for anybody but the super rich. But
yeah, it worked, more or less.
Well, it worked because certain professionals could afford it, universities could afford it, and so you had an ever increasing number of people who were getting used to it. And I mean, I, for example, as a law student, had to learn in my first semester how to use the shepherding system, and then never, ever shepherdized anything again in my life. Because the shepherd system of looking up keywords, then finding all the cases that use those keywords, and having these massive, massive collections of hundreds of books with all the case decisions in them, and having to then search through those, was so unbelievably time-consuming. You jumped on Lexis, and in 5 minutes you had the same result that would have taken you almost an hour with the shepherd system. And that, it has truly revolutionized the way that legal decisions have influenced common law jurisprudence, because we no longer have to wait until the latest version of the Shepherd book comes out. The decision is dropped, the decision gets published, and the next day it's in the database. And I still remember, as a lawyer, I had a subscription to a service where every week I got the latest relevant cases to my areas of practice for my jurisdiction. And it was, okay, check the email. Good. It's Friday morning. Let's read through it. Okay. These are the new cases. Make some notes. And that was it. And those were also immediately in Lexis. So if I ever need to pull them up again, I didn't have to find the email. I just checked Lexis, and that was it. So yeah, we take for granted today that all these resources, like Wikipedia, for example, are at our fingertips. And to think that there were professionals 40 years ago for whom this was already a reality is kind of humbling, because we think, oh, we're the cool people with first ones doing this. And these guys are most of them, these professionals are already long dead, and they're looking down at us like noobs. And that's kind of cool. I respect that. Okay. That concludes our first jump of December 2020. So I guess we're going to have to close out the show here. Any final thoughts, Peter?
Well, I really like that in the 1980s, our last story is someone being born rather than a company dying. So.
That is true. That is true. This is actually something starting as opposed to something ending. Oh, don't worry. I'm sure we'll see something die before we're done with December and this decade. But this is good. You're right. This is good. We're going into the new year with hope and optimism and something.
Exactly.
Right? Good. Yeah.
Definitely something.
Because everybody knows 2020 has been everything but upbeat. So, okay. Now, remember, everybody, you can help the show out by going to our Patreon, link in the show notes below. Follow us on Twitter or any of the other wonderful social media platforms. And, just tell your friends about it. Give us a like. or a review or anything, we're desperate. Please. And we'll see you again next week for another exciting voyage through the history of video game news. Have fun.
Bye.